Hello, friends. Today, I want to talk more about how we use continuous glucose monitors to hack our blood sugar. So, in the last episode, I talked about my top three blood sugar hacks and mentioned that I was confidently sharing this information with you because I had seen these work in so many people by looking at the continuous glucose monitor data. I'd also shared that short term continuous glucose monitor use is the tool that we find the most helpful to find the most impactful strategies for each person to improve their blood sugar. The data we get from them in combination with a little experimenting tells us very quickly what works best and what doesn't. So they're a big part of our 80-20 strategy where we try to isolate that elusive 20% input that gives us our 80% of our results. So let's talk about these. And I want to start by talking about the hardware and what these things actually are. So we call them CGMs for short, and they are basically a little biosensor. Oh, I've got one here. If you're watching on YouTube, this biosensor is about the size of a nickel most of the time. There's two brands of them, the Dexcom and the Freestyle Libre, and I've got the Freestyle Libre in my hand. Um, and it's about the size of a nickel, and it sits on your arm, usually at the back of your arm, but some people put them in other places. And it lasts for about 10 to 14 days at a time, sending real-time glucose data to your smartphone. And some people who don't have a compatible smartphone can buy a separate little reader that it goes to. But let's just talk about the smartphone because the overwhelming majority of people use these with a smartphone. And these things sound too good to be true. At least that's what I thought. But it works, and they're kind of cool. How it works is this: there is a small filament, and if you're watching on YouTube, like you can see, you can't even see it. It's so small. It's a small filament on the back of this nickel-shaped sensor, and that goes about 6 to 8 millimeters into your skin, and it samples your interstitial fluid. It doesn't sample your blood. So this filament is like a very short acupuncture needle or a very coarse mustache hair. And I should say right here that it actually doesn't hurt at all to install it, to put it onto your arm. And so what happens is the CGM takes a sample, a glucose sample about every minute, and then sends the readings to your phone. And from your phone, you can look and see what your glucose levels are in real time, anytime you want. And you can also see on your phone what your blood sugar's been doing for the past like 8 to 12 hours. You'll see a nice little curve of what's been going on. And in that same app, you can usually, if you're using depends on the system you're using, you can often add quick little notes about what you've been eating, your sleep, your symptoms. And depending on what system you're using, these can be simple notes or very detailed. So it's really slick. And I should say right here, because I'm talking about this being really cool and helpful, these continuous glucose monitors have been around for a long time, and they are primarily used, let's be really clear, for people to manage their insulin, especially people with type 1 diabetes. Um, this is what they're made for, and they help people with type 1 diabetes dose their insulin and stay alive, right? So they aren't that cool to someone like that because they need them to live. And for a long time, they were only available to people with type 1 diabetes or people with type 2 diabetes using a lot of insulin. But now why just use something to help you dose insulin and treat diabetes? Why don't we use it to prevent? That's what we're using it for. Um, so let's go back to using this hardware and also the software, because when we use them, you can actually use software that you have to pay for, apps that you pay for. But I tend to use the free software that comes with the hardware that's put out by Dexcom and Abbott for the Freestyle Libre. And there's another bit of free software that you use on your desktop that looks at your historical data that helps people like me, especially, um, read my patients' data and help them connect the dots. But my patients can use this by themselves too. And now I want to point something out because this gets confusing. You might have seen some people on social media I'm using a continuous glucose monitor and I'm testing this food. And on the continuous glucose monitor side, the thing on the back of their arm doesn't look like a nickel-sized sensor. It looks like a big patch. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you can buy these adhesive patches that go over your CGM, that go over the sensor, and they often have a little logo on them. Underneath that patch is the same little sensor. It's the same thing. So if you're looking at them and wondering if we're talking about the same thing, we are talking about the exact same thing. Now, the coolest thing about a continuous glucose monitor to me is that you can test your strategies and get immediate feedback. I can't tell you how useful this is because it used to be, and it still is for most people, that if you want to try out a strategy, let's say you listened to my last video and you're like, I'm going to walk after all my meals. And you wanted to see, is this strategy effective? You would need to do that consistently for 3 months to wait until your next A1C lab, hemoglobin A1C, which kind of gives you an idea of your average blood sugar over 3 months. So that's just too long. For one thing, you're a very advanced human being if you can be consistent about one strategy for 3 months and wait and then see if it works. And not only that, but there's so many other variables that could have changed to know if that's what you did. Most people tend to be trying a few things, and most people aren't consistent with it because they don't believe it works. You lose interest, you lose motivation. And I'm not saying, that's just human. If you are using a continuous glucose monitor, you can test something and see if it works instantly. And then you can A/B test different strategies in a matter of days, not months, not years. So in a matter of days, you can get results that tell you what works and what doesn't, and then start implementing that strategy more consistently. So if it works, you are reaping the benefits right away in days and weeks. You don't have to wait 3 months. So when I tell people that, yeah, I have a client who, he was 100% in range within 4 weeks of starting to use a continuous glucose monitor and working with me, and they think, oh, that's just crazy. He has type 2 diabetes. It's not crazy. And it works because people can see what works and what doesn't, change their behaviors confidently, knowing what they're doing is enough, and then it works, and it works quickly. Um, and and in terms of being confident and confidently implementing these strategies, if you heard my last episode where I talk about walking after meals and how effective that is, and I said that I never practiced that or advised people because I didn't believe it was enough. When theoretically that something could be helpful, it's only mildly motivating to do it. But when you know something because you have seen the data and you know it works, that is so motivating, my friend. That is so motivating. And it's a little bit like a video game. And let me tell you what I mean by being a little bit by video game. And this is something I learned when I read James Clear's book, Atomic Habits. And I know there's a lot of Atomic Habits fans out there. He talks about how things aren't set up very well for us to make healthy choices. And this is because when we do something that's healthy for us, it's often something gives delayed gratification. So if I go for a run now, I'm not going to see the benefits sometimes I feel good after I run, but I still have to get through the hump of not feeling good. But often we don't see the benefit of, say, not eating a Snickers bar after lunch for 3 to 6 months. So there's that delayed benefit. Whereas if we eat the Snickers bar, we know we're going to feel good and get the benefit right away. So there's a mismatch in the reward system. Whereas when we use a CGM, we both get immediate benefit because we can see, hey, that works. I get a good blood sugar level. Yes, it's like a win. It's like a little video game win. And then if we do something that totally spikes our blood sugar and makes our blood sugar really high for a long time, that's that's like a punishment. That's a loss, and it's something you want to avoid. So it really is a nice little deterrent to not having the Snickers bar after lunch, or it's a motivator to go for a walk after lunch because you see that immediate benefit. You get on that leaderboard. So it it puts us in a better position for being rewarded for doing something that's good for us and not getting rewarded or kind of being punished, getting a ding for doing something that's not good for us. And let me tell you, people, that works for our little squirrel brains. So now I'd like to pivot and talk a little bit about using finger sticks and a more traditional glucometer versus using a CGM or a continuous glucose monitor. Because some of you might be thinking, hey, Karen, I do finger sticks, so I know how things affect my blood sugar. I'm good. And if you're good, you're good. If finger sticks are helping you with your blood sugar and you've managed to reduce your medications and you are improving your blood sugar, reversing your diabetes or whatever, and it's working for you, awesome. But here's the thing, finger sticks don't show you overnight data or the full picture of what each meal does to your blood sugar. For example, it is very hard, if not impossible, to tell the difference between, say, the dawn phenomenon, which involves elevated morning blood sugar, and having high blood sugar all night long if you don't have a CGM. With a CGM, we see the whole thing. And that's really important, especially when assessing things. And you just don't know when your peak blood sugar is after a meal. You're really guessing. I take it 1 hour later or 2 hours. And you don't know how long it takes to come back to baseline unless you test it every 30 minutes, and nobody's going to be doing that. Also, regular testing with finger sticks is not free. It does cost a fair bit of money in test strips. Still, cost and availability of CGMs are a concern for many. It's not nothing. However, a lot of this concern is based on incorrect or old information. So I want to clear this information up right now. I, for one, assumed for years that I wouldn't be able to afford a CGM, even if I could get a prescription for it, which I was sure I couldn't. And there was no way my patients would be able to afford it. But I now know that was 100% wrong. For one thing, CGMs have really come down in price over the years, and they are much easier to obtain now than they were 5 years ago or even 3 years ago. You do have to jump through some hoops to get them, and there's a few different ways you can get them, and they do cost money. But let's be clear about what that looks like, because even if you're on a tight budget, you could use one of these for about 4 weeks, get a lot out of it in terms of your health. And in the long run, this could be both a money and a lifesaver. So before I go any further, I want to be really clear. The United States is, I think, the only country that requires a prescription for a CGM. And you can buy them over the counter most other countries. And I can't speak for all other countries, but the ones that I've worked in and talked to people in, particularly Canada, Mexico, the United Kingdom, most of Western Europe, you don't need a prescription. In those other countries, the ones that am familiar with, if you have a prescription from your doctor and it's been recommended by your doctor, you can often get them cheaper. And then if you just go into the chemist, to the drugstore, it's much more expensive. So that's other countries. But that's all I'm going to say about other countries because I'm not as familiar with them. I'm going to talk specifically about the situation in the United States where you have to have a prescription. So the least expensive way to use a continuous glucose monitor in the United States is to get a prescription from your doctor, from your prescriber, and buy it at your pharmacy. And I'll hit you with the details of that on another episode. But suffice to say that your doctor can write a prescription for a CGM for anyone. Your doctor may balk, saying that you have to have diabetes using insulin to get one. But what they mean is you often need those things to get insurance coverage. Those are two different things. You can get a prescription for something without insurance coverage. It means you need to pay the full cash price of it. That's it. And if your doctor says anything other than that, it's totally bullshit. They often are not familiar with using it in an off-label capacity, but the off-label prescribing of medications and devices is commonplace. It's commonplace. So now that we're past that, once you get your prescription from your doctor, from your prescriber, you just need to take that prescription to a pharmacy and then you purchase your continuous glucose monitor. That's it. That is the cheapest way to do it. And this is what it costs. Here's another caveat. All pharmacies set their own prices. So the price of the CGM in cash will depend on what pharmacy you choose, probably what part of the country you're in, because it seems to vary that way too, and what coupons are available to you. Because our system is so weird. But nobody consulted me, so I'm not going to discuss that anymore. What I will tell you is that the cheapest price you will find it for is $37 for a Freestyle Libre CGM for one sensor that lasts for 2 weeks. So for a month of sensors, that's going to be just under $80. That's the lowest price you will find it for. That's the base price. And I encourage you to find that. Now, I have seen some places where we just cannot find a pharmacy selling it for under $50 per sensor. That's just what it is. But I would say that anywhere from $37 to $75 per sensor, and each one of those Freestyle Libre sensors lasts for 2 weeks, means that you're going to be paying for a month anywhere from $80 to $150 just for your CGM use. That's the price. Now, I'm talking about a Freestyle Libre if you're using a Dexcom. I don't use those as often for various reasons. It's a great product, great CGM, but those are going to be for a month. They're going to be at least $350, I believe, for a month. And again, that really depends. Now, in terms of coupons and things, I'll talk about those later in another episode. But there's always a free trial that you can get in on to get your first one free. Pharmacies have in-store coupons. So you got to ask. And that's when I have clients and people do my groups, this is what I help them with. I help each one of these people get the lowest price, get them in, get their CGM, and then we're good to go. So that's the hardware. That's accessing them. That's using free software and not using and not going through a tech company to use one of their apps that you have to pay for. So you don't have to use these forever. The other part of the savings that people don't understand is I'm not talking about using a CGM for a year, month after month after month. I'm talking about using them for 4 weeks. That's what in the system that I do, we use it for 2 weeks to gather data to see what's going on, to see how you react to food. We use the next 2 weeks to experiment with some strategies and see what's the most effective. And this is what results in people finding the things that have the most benefit, the 80-20 rule. But sometimes things are still a bit of a mystery. Sometimes things aren't budging, but at least we know what to do next, like a sleep study, do a few more labs. And maybe a few months later, they might pop another sensor on to check their progress and experiment with something else. But this isn't about continuous use. So the reduced cost comes both in knowing how to access it, the least expensive way, using the free software, and then investing on the front end, like really using the data that you have for 4 weeks and often getting support with that. And that's why I do group programs and work one-on-one with people so that when we have that data, we make the best use and then we know what to do later on. So I kind of want to summarize next what 4 things the continuous glucose monitor helps us do. It helps us do 4 things. And the first thing, and I think this is the most important, is it gives us a correct assessment of the situation. 2 people can have the same diagnosis and a different cause. And if the cause is different, the solution is going to be different too. So the CGM gives us a correct assessment of the situation. The second thing it does that's really valuable is it helps with education. It helps me to educate my clients, my group participants, into what works and what doesn't. And for some people, you can do this yourself. You can educate yourself about what works and what doesn't. It's data. This isn't rocket science. You can do this. The third thing it does for some people is it gives a bit of accountability. So remember when I talked about that thing from Atomic Habits about the mismatch and reward system? It gives you it's like that video game. You're trying to get the best numbers, you're trying to improve things. It makes it fun. It's a good dopamine hit for those of us who've got a bit of a squirrel brain and we need those dopamine hits to motivate us. And some people do use it a bit more long term for that accountability. And finally, this data can help you and your doctor make better decisions about your medication use and other necessary labs, right? So, I'm all for getting people off medication, but medication has its place, but let's be smart. We can see when it's time, like, no, you do need to use some metformin, or it is time to use some insulin for a while. Just like we can tell when it's time to start stepping down off that medication. This is how I help people with type 2 diabetes reduce and eliminate their need for insulin and start gradually backing off of other medication. It's a really skillful use, prevents a lot of unnecessary hypoglycemia during that process. So, if you're a person trying to lower your blood sugar, you can do some of this on your own. But you might want some support along the way from a nutrition professional. And this is what we do. This is what I do here one on one with people or in our regular 4-week group programs called Hack Your Blood Sugar Using a CGM. And you can learn more about this on our website. And there are more and more nutrition professionals out there supporting this technology. I know this because I've been training them. And if you are a nutrition professional listening to this or other healthcare provider who wants to learn more about adding this to your clinical toolbox to support your patients, be sure to check out our website for the professional resources. And finally, I always love to hear from you. I love to hear what works for you in the comments, in our YouTube channel, Instagram, Facebook. And if you have suggestions of what we should talk about next or a guest that we should have on, please be sure to let me know. And thank you so much for listening.